Hello, this is Neil Thind again of Aaron Associates, and this is Nick Huband of William J. Marshall, and this is the fifth of our presentations where we'll be discussing matters concerning underpinning and structural repair works to party walls under the Party Wall Act. Now, underpinning and structural repair works fall under the category of Section 2 works under the Party Wall Act. Underpinning, if you can explain what underpinning is first of all, if you can explain what that is. Yeah.
I suppose underpinning is basically taking the foundations down to a level below which they won't be affected by an issue. The issue being perhaps tree roots sometimes, perhaps the excavation of the adjoining owner's property. The idea is simply to make sure that the foundations of the wall are not going to be disturbed by this new factor, should we say.
Okay, so underpinning is required basically to shore up the neighbour's property, or your own property,
Yeah.
sorry. It could be a neighbour's property as well.
Yeah.
But let's say it's your house, and you've noticed some structural cracks. The usual course of action would be you get in touch with your insurance brokers.
Yes, that's right.
They'll then send a loss adjuster down to assess the damage or cracking to your property. And would you say there's normally a process of monitoring to ascertain?
That's one of the first. Well, one of the first things I'll do is I'll try and do a soil investigation to determine, for example, with trees, the degree of desiccation of the subsoil, how much moisture is being sucked out by perhaps the adjoining tree, or whether you've got other issues going on. You've got perhaps peat lenses beneath it that's drying out. But so often it's a tree issue, and they'll first of all find out what the ground's like. They'll then monitor the building, depending on what they find from the site investigation, normally over 4 seasons, so that we get the full growing season of the tree and we can see the effect of the tree on the subsoil and therefore on the foundation of the building.
So then they come up with a design solution to basically shore up the house, and that could involve a party structure. So if you've got you're on a property, you've got a wall which you share with your neighbour, that could involve underpinning that party wall.
Very much so.
Okay, so that can involve underpinning. Now, underpinning has to be carried out in a particular way because there is a degree of risk if the underpinning operation isn't carried out in a safe way. I mean, do you want to explain the sort of the underpinning sequence as such that needs to be considered?
In the simplest terms, underpinning is cutting out a section of the ground beneath the foundations of the building and then casting new concrete in there to bring the level of the foundations down below the level at which perhaps the tree roots will affect it. Now, cutting away beneath the foundations of a building is never something that's been taken on lightly. So, underpinning, over the years, quite useful techniques developed. You start off by limiting the width of underpinning to about 1 metre or so. You can cut away beneath the foundations of a building, normally along the wall, about 1 metre wide, and the wall will arch over it quite happily without any great problems. Obviously, the engineer needs to be sure of the condition of the wall and its quality, but this is a general principle. Once you've done that, you've poured your concrete into the hole, you've left a small gap, perhaps 75 millimetres between the underside of the existing foundations and the top of the concrete, and then you ram that with a dry pack, a semi-dry mortar and sand, cement sand mortar, to ensure that the underpinning is pinned up tightly to the underside of the wall, so there's no risk of movement as the building settles down onto the new underpinning. Once you've done that, you then need to do the next bit of underpinning. Now, you should never do it one next to the other, because now you're cutting away one section of wall while the other one's curing. So underpinners use a sort of finger technique. Imagine that's my first underpin. Then I jump to my second underpin, my third underpin, my fourth underpin, and back to one again, to ensure that I'm never underpinning 2 adjacent pins at any one time.
Okay. The underpinning may be extended to the neighbouring property, so if you're an attached building with the neighbours, is there a prospect that part of their building will also be underpinned as a result of the design solution that's been drawn up by the design engineer?
Very much so. If the damage is limited to one building, even so, even if you're, let's say you're underpinned to a depth of perhaps 3 metres on your client's property, you can't simply stop that 3 metre deep underpinning at the boundary wall. There has to be a transition period. but as the underpinning steps back up to the underside of the neighbour's property, because otherwise you have a very steep step, and any steps like that, any dramatic change in section in structures in general, often cause cracking. Whereas a gentle transition of it, stepping up like a little flight of steps up the underside of the adjoining owner's property, will help reduce that risk. The difficulty is, of course, how it's paid for and whether the insurers will pay for this work to an adjoining owner's property, or whether it becomes a separate claim with the adjoining owner.
And we've dealt with a few cases where decisions have been made to carry out these transitional underpins,
Yes.
and there has to be the agreement of the neighbour to allow access onto their land to basically underpin the front and back walls of their property.
Yes, that's right.
To put in these transitional underpin bays.
Yes.
Because if you don't do that, as you say, you're going to have a shored up section of their property, and one that isn't so shored up.
Yes, absolutely.
And that's where a stress crack could form, I would
Yes.
imagine, yes.
Because the subsoil and the trees, they have no interest in boundaries between properties. So you have to deal with the situation as a whole, in the round, rather than just looking at a single property in isolation. As I said, that's where it can get rather complicated.
Okay, I mean, there are situations where notice is served on adjoining owners where we make mention about the need to underpin or not to underpin their property.
Yes.
Now, if you're, as a layperson, you've just received a notice, how would you necessarily know whether to underpin or not to underpin? Or have your property underpinned or not underpinned? How would you know that?
I don't think a layperson could be expected to know that. It's
No.
way beyond their experience.
Yes.
So I think the first thing they should do is ask to speak to the party wall surveyor, who then should be able to sit down with the adjoining owner and explain in very straightforward layman terms how this work's to be done. Well, first of all, why the work is necessary, and secondly, how it's going to be done and what possible risks there are to their property.
Yes.
And hopefully that should then, the good party wall surveyor should be able to explain these things in a way that the neighbour will understand and be comfortable with it and understand the need for it.
And yes, we could certainly explain that. I'm a party wall surveyor myself, and I often explain the need to have this underpinning in place to obviously shore up their property. However, you may need also, as a party wall surveyor, some sort of backup or comfort from the structural engineers as well. So they step in and give further professional advice, which can then be passed on to the neighbours.
Yes, that's right.
Explaining that.
And again, in this case, an engineer's report can sometimes not be the most penetrable of documents. And again, this is where the party wall surveyor is needed to interpret the engineer's report. So look at the diagrams the engineer's put into his report and explain how they impact on the neighbour's property, what these curves actually mean in terms of desiccation of the subsoil and why the foundations have to go that far. And I think that's another role for the party wall surveyor. The party wall surveyor afterwards is acting for the wall, and he needs to interpret to the adjoining owner, in fact to his own instructed owner, what needs to be done, why it needs to be done.
Okay. Just moving on to other types of repairs to a party wall, because underpinning is one repair aspect,
Yeah.
but there's also other repairs. You've got cracked bricks, you've got displaced bricks, to a party
yes,
wall.
right.
So you're looking at a party wall. You got a fracture or a crack running down the wall, possibly as a result of a subsidence issue in your property,
Yes.
or the neighbouring property, or both.
Yes.
So in that situation, that is notifiable under the Party Wall
Yes,
Act, a
right.
repair to that wall
Yes.
where it is cracked. I think it's only notifiable if you're doing certain structural repairs to that wall.
Yes.
If it's a simple case of just hacking off plaster and just patching up the crack and then plastering again, that's not so much notifiable. But there's certain structural repairs, like say reinforcement rods that could be put into a wall just to
Yes, that's
stitch up the bricks. And do you want to just give a bit more information on that?
The problem is once a building's cracked, the building, any further movement will tend to be concentrated in that crack, because after all the minimum energy required is to actually open up an existing crack rather than to snap the brickwork somewhere else. So you need to make sure that that area is restored to its condition before the works, and that's where it can get a little bit complicated. In modern buildings where you've got strong bricks in a strong cement sand mortar, you often use helibars. They're stainless steel rods that are cut into the mortar in the bed joints between the bricks on either side of the crack. and they will essentially stitch together the crack. That works well with modern buildings. With older buildings where you've got softer lime mortars and you've got quite soft bricks, you have to be more careful, and sometimes you don't want to put the steel in because the new steel reinforcing rods will create a hard spot in this wall. And in these cases, sometimes you're looking at either cutting out cracked bricks and stitching in with new bricks and lime mortar, or sometimes you simply grout the crack up with a lime mortar and face off the area on either side of the crack with, for example, a brick mesh, which is a rather unusual material. It's a mesh of stainless steel with clay nodules formed on all the intersections in the stainless steel, and that's put on the wall, screwed in place. And the clay nodules help the render that you're putting over the top to refurbish it to bond nicely and to avoid any sort of hard spots being created or any problems with differential movement as things get hotter and colder, wetter and drier. Old brickwork, you can still get issues with new steel being inserted into old features. So we need to look at the joining owner's foundation.
I've dealt with cases where neighbours have removed chimney breast walls, and as a result of that, the party structure that was left it has been in a very bad condition, very unsafe condition, where that chimney breast wall was replaced.
Yeah.
And it only comes to light once the neighbour, the next door neighbour, if they've had an inbuilt cupboard fitted against the wall, they take that out, and then they reveal the party wall.
Yes.
And then they see this very ropey brickwork there.
Yes.
And it's a case of, in situations like that, you have to retake out those defective bricks. It kind of almost like whole patches of brickwork that have to be taken out, and then new bricks stitched in its place.
And you've got two problems there, haven't you? You've got the damage caused by the works previously, but you've also got the building practices of the Victorian engineers who'd used their nice expensive bricks for the front elevations of the buildings and put all the old half-baked or slightly ropey bricks in the party wall, where of course they'd never be seen. So you have to be somewhat careful as what was original work and what was simply very poor workmanship and cutting corners 150, 200 years ago.
Yes, I mean it's not a case of taking a whole big patch of brickwork. There's got to be some propping or some support put in place. I would imagine, maybe strong boy type.
Exactly, if you have to
like
take
that,
over a sufficient amount, yes. But often in these cases, you can actually piece out the brickwork. And you're talking about up to perhaps 750 millimetres, a metre or so, depending on the condition of it.
Yes.
You can actually cut out a piece of the brickwork. So it tends not to be quite so difficult. They're discrete individual cracks or areas of poor work.
Okay, there's also other repairs where party wall meets, or front wall meets the party wall, or the back wall of a house meets the party wall as well, and there could be some weakness of that particular corner of the house.
Yes.
Now there's repairs that could be effected to strengthen up the back and rear wall corners. I take it is that right? I mean, if you can explain a bit that.
Yeah. And they're vulnerable points anyway. You probably gathered from our previous talks. Any corner, any change of direction is a vulnerable point, and any movements in the structure will often be concentrated at corners. And again, as we spoke earlier, we have the possibly poor brickwork in the party wall and the better brickwork on the front elevation. So there'll always be a weak point there. So engineers can come along and strengthen that. Sometimes just as simple as mild steel straps or stainless steel straps around the corner. Okay. But more commonly, you want to put in a reinforced concrete elbow, for example. Right. It's just an L-shaped piece of concrete, precast, carefully cut into the existing brickwork, mortared in place, and providing a stronger corner to replace existing. Right. And perhaps you put those at a third point or a quarter points on the height of the wall.
So a quarter way up the wall, and
yes,
halfway and then 3/4.
Yes,
right, I see, understood.
And again, that provides now a robust frame back.
Okay,
structures.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Nick. That concludes this presentation. This has been a presentation by Aaron Associates, Chartered Surveyors and Property Consultants, in conjunction with William J. Marshall and Partners, Structural Engineers and Architects. As the building owner, please be aware that you will need to comply with all statutory regulations, including complying with party wall legislation, building regulation and planning requirements. I hope this presentation has been of value to you, and if you have any further issues regarding your building project, or if you are a neighbour that might be affected by building works which your neighbour is intending to undertake, please do not hesitate to contact us. Thank you.